Then the announcement came.
The winner and new heavyweight champion!
Braddock won. He took 9 of the 15 rounds to win in a unanimous decision.
After the Max Baer fight, they interviewed both in the ring. Max Baer says on radio to the interviewer, "I'm happy for Jimmy."
Braddock always said, there are 500 ways to beat any given fighter. I had 499 ways to beat Max Baer. So in Braddock's mind, he always had the ability or the know-how to beat Max Baer.
Braddock made one of the greatest comebacks in the history of boxing and furnished a ring upset that has been unparalleled in modern times.
Jimmy Braddock was now the heavyweight champion of the world. Joe Gould had maneuvered him into the shot and now the championship. And now they just put it under their arm and went back to sleep.
But waiting in the wings was a ferocious newcomer, Joe Louis, coined the Brown Bomber. After the fight, he was quoted as saying, "Ain't nobody gonna tell me these are the 2 best fighters in the world."
The time Jimmy Braddock defeated Max Baer for the heavyweight championship of the world, a young black man by the name of Joe Louis was making a tremendous name for himself in the heavyweight ranks, going through all the challengers like a hot knife through butter. By the spring of 1936, the logical contender, #1 contender for Jimmy Braddock's title was this young phenomenon named Joe Louis.
Joe Louis began in Detroit, moved to Chicago, was really a phenomenon in the Midwest. He was a legend in the Midwest and came to New York with enormous anticipation. The entire American boxing public was waiting to see him fight.
And even after he had 3 or 4 fights, they started calling him the next heavyweight champion of the world because had all the skill, had all the punching power, best combination fight in the world. Everyone expected Joe Louis to become heavyweight champion of the world.
But any plans for Braddock to fight Joe Louis were disrupted when a German fighter, Max Schmeling, knocked Louis out in a 12-round bout.
This phenomenon meets defeat at the fists of Max Schmeling. Ergo, the New York State Athletic Commission dictates that Schmeling is the #1 challenger, the former champion Schmeling, for Jimmy Braddock's crown.
Max Schmeling had ascended to the #1 challenger position with his surprising defeat of Joe Louis. But Schmeling was from Germany, and the fear was that if Schmeling were to defeat Braddock for the heavyweight championship, the Nazis would keep the title in Germany, where they would use it as a propaganda tool.
So Braddock has got to start looking for a way to get out of his fight with Schmeling and fight Joe Louis instead. That's the way to go.
There is a war going on for control of Madison Square Garden. Colonel Kirkpatrick is head of it. Jimmy Johnston, the boy bandit, is the matchmaker.
And so does the Madison Square Garden Corporation. They are now threatening federal court action through their president, Colonel J. Reed Kilpatrick.
But Madison Square Garden Corporation is just old-fashioned enough to believe in keeping its agreements. And it will take such steps as may be necessary to see that the others involved do the same.
Jimmy Braddock was supposed to defend his title against Max Schmeling. He was diagnosed with arthritis in his hand, caused by the various breaks over the year. So what happened was that the fight was postponed. The Schmeling-Braddock fight was postponed. And when they went to reschedule it, when they reviewed the contracts, they realized that there was enough wiggle room. Braddock was able to get out of the contract and sign to fight Joe Louis.
Joe Louis's people made Jimmy Braddock's manager and Braddock an offer they couldn't refuse. It's not like The Godfather. Couldn't refuse it. They told Braddock if he fought Joe Louis, and if Joe Louis had won, Braddock would receive 10% of Joe Louis's yearly purses as long as Joe Louis fights.
To give you some sort of idea of the money that was involved, I believe that Braddock won somewhere around $30,000 for his share of the fight when he beat Max Baer. Against Joe Louis, it would be equivalent of several $1 million in today's money. So clearly the fight with Joe Louis would absolutely give him enough money to live the rest of his life without any worry.
The deal was done, and Braddock agreed to defend the title against Louis at Comiskey Park in Chicago in June 1937, 2 years after his win over Bayer.
Jimmy Braddock entered the ring to face Joe Louis, a 3-to-1 underdog. Only a few people gave him a chance to win.
Promoter Mike Jacobs was so concerned that Louis might hurt Braddock that he hired an ambulance to be parked outside the arena at fight time.
With Jimmy Braddock, you have somebody that is a destroyer of the hardest punching fighters that were thrown against him. A destroyer whose legend lives on right now. Someone that not will just beat you, but that's going to put you in the hospital and maybe permanently disable you. And you match that against the grit of Braddock, who may be at the point in his career where he has had his last hurrah.
The only thing Braddock had going for him was experience, and the only real hope for his supporters was that Louis might freeze in his first championship bout.
Braddock had to look for a way to win this fight, even though it was very clear that he was going to have a hard time to beat Joe Louis. And one of the things that he did was he figured hit the guy on the chin is the easiest way to win a fight. Braddock, in fact, in the first round does land a little right uppercut against Joe Louis and dumps Louis to the seat of his pants.
In the first round, it seemed that Braddock's supporters might be proven right.
Joe Louis, as the films clearly show, came out in the first round and started to probe Braddock like a matador in a bull, and just to see what his reactions were. And in opening up on Braddock a little bit, Joe Louis made one fatal mistake, and Jimmy Braddock still had enough in him, enough cagey veteran knowledge to pull the string on Joe Louis.
Braddock, in fact, in the first round does land a little right uppercut against Joe Louis and dumps Louis to the seat of his pants. Louis recovered, lost the first round obviously for the first 2 or 3 rounds, but by the 4th round, Joe Louis took over, absolutely dominated. It got to the point by the 6th round, every time that Louis hit Braddock, the crowd was just absolutely imploring the referee to stop the fight. And when Braddock came back to his corner, Joe Gould, his manager, said, "That's it, Jim, you've had enough, I'm stopping the fight." And Braddock said, "If you do that, I'll never speak to you again as long as I live. I'm the champion, and if I'm going to lose this title, I'm going to lose it on the deck."
And Louis just simply overwhelmed him. Finally hit him one right hand in the 8th round and dropped him. For the first time Braddock had ever been down, and he was counted out there.
Braddock was gashed horribly on the mouth and above and below the left eye. He would need 23 stitches in his face. Lewis drove Braddock's tooth right through his mouthpiece and his lip.
When Braddock went down, he lay there, and then his body relaxed. And anyone that has been hit that hard, and I have, can tell you that the pain and the numbness spreads, whether it's in the body or to the head. And it's just incredible, the punishment that Jimmy Braddock took that night. I don't think anyone could have stopped Joe Louis on the night he went after the heavyweight championship, but Jimmy Braddock tried.
Jimmy Braddock, having the pride of a great champion, didn't want to end his career with a loss. He wanted to go out a winner. He signed for one more fight with the #1 challenger, Tommy Farr, who only 3 months earlier had lost a close decision to Joe Louis.
In January of 1938, Jim Braddock returned to the ring one more time before announcing his retirement.
So he chose to fight one more fight. But he could have looked for an easy fight. He didn't. He chose to fight Tommy Farr. Tommy Farr was a tough fighter. #2 contender. So Braddock didn't look for anything easy. He trained. He fought Tommy Farr. It was a hard-fought fight. And at the end of 10 rounds, Jimmy Braddock's hand was raised. Again, he was in victory.
After beating Tommy Farr in 10 rounds on points, Jim Braddock announced his retirement. "This is my farewell to active boxing," he said. "A sport which owes me nothing, and to which I owe everything. The many friends I have made, and the means with which I've been able to provide for my family."
The Cinderella Man, James J. Braddock.
After retiring, Braddock took a job selling surplus military supplies, then went on to the Operating Engineers Union. He was a proud and doting grandfather. He died on November the 29th, 1974, age 69, and is buried next to his wife, May.
If you look at the man and look at who he was and what he did and what he accomplished, it's truly one of the great stories of all time. I mean, he had nothing. He came from nothing and became heavyweight champion of the world in less than a year. It's a really true Cinderella story.
He wasn't known as a great stylist, but he was forever present in that ring.
Jimmy Braddock went out with the old school, old warrior ethic that a champion has to be counted out. And he wasn't going to give up that title to Joe Louis that night without a fight.
And therein lies the story.
Gangbusters has a special narrator for tonight's case. Former heavyweight champion of the world, Jim Braddock.
The inside facts in the case of the Jersey Butcher Bandits.
You know, Mr. Braddock, Gangbusters listeners usually expect to hear our case histories narrated by police officials.
I know it, Don Gardner, and the name is Jim. The two detectives who worked on it are close friends of mine. One of them was my sparring partner. I saw them work for 48 hours without sleep and for weeks without taking a day off. So I called you up. I thought that I, as a citizen, should come and tell other citizens what our police are doing to protect us.
Well, when you got in touch with us, Jim, we thought it would be a splendid idea, so why don't you go right ahead?
All right, Don. Suppose we begin one day last summer.